I love analog horror. It's as simple as that. I mean, I'm subscribed to the likes of Wendigoon, Wowman, 4 Plus, and on a lesser known scale, Reapestrella, who I'm surprised managed to cover some analog horror way before 4 Plus did, and I rely on that guy for all my analog horror content. Anyway, I'm surprised that a series such as this had flew under their radar because it's an interesting take on analog horror, because it's not really analog horror. Hold on, let me explain. This series is part of what I like to call the UOA, or Unanswered Oddities Archive. And while it's not scary like most of analog horror, in fact, there's more comedy and very little horror, but there's definitely something uncanny about it. See, the entire series is created by Neural Viz here on YouTube, who I think has been doing great work on this series and keeping the tone of the videos. In fact, we actually get to see and know the characters quite well in a sense. I should also mention that I'm the only one somewhat labeling this as analog horror because I don't think Neural Viz has labeled this as anything close to analog horror, but believe me, there is a story behind this weird uncanny madness. Anyway, let's begin from, well, the beginning.
Here at Gumo Corp, we know what it takes to make the perfect gumball. So, how do we do it? We utilize a
The first video is called Gumo Corp, who introduced themselves as a corporation focused on bringing the likes of you and me the best gumballs in the world, adding the likes of sugar, spice, and, well, everything nice. These were the ingredients to make the perfect gumball, but the scientists actually made a mistake and opened a fucking cosmic portal to a higher dimensional being, who, with all his godly power, helped them create the perfect gumball. Of course, we the people wonder if they have access to what is essentially a god. Why did they have him create the best gumball in the world, instead of, solving world hunger or something like that? Well, the answer is simple, because they tell us that they're dedicated to us, the Gummo customer, in their pursuit of giving us the most tasty and delicious gumballs in the world. And with that, the video ends, but not after the female narrator tells us that Zorgop knows all.
Zorgop knows all.
It's kind of strange.
That's suspicious.
On tonight's episode of Unanswered.
The next video is of an episode of a television series called Unanswered Oddities, presented to us in a Lost Tapes, Ancient Aliens kind of style. And the first episode is about humans. Hang on a second. These aren't humans. Just what or who are these things? Well, we can't worry about that just yet, as it seems that in this world, humans are supposed to be a myth who apparently liked potatoes and enjoyed sleep. I know I can relate to the second one. Apparently, sightings of humans have made a few people question if humans are real or not, as our host tells us that in rural Mormog, which is apparently 2 hours just outside of Deedle, is where a hiker had sighted a human. Our witness, Bobo Fugsnook, says he went out for a midnight look, where he apparently saw a human, which he could recognize by the knees, which I'm guessing is because he's never seen his own based on his sheer girth. Anyway, he says he was scared for his life and called the police, where Sergeant Ruck Bobgow arrived at the scene and searched for any humans, but only found a toothbrush. Truly, a ghastly sight to see. Then we hear from Professor Bort Yami, a human mythologist. He says while they don't know much about humans, he believes that we were wildly stupid creatures, which he's not wrong about. But he believes that we did some cool things like water sports, which I don't agree with. Next we hear from author Lurby C. Wignorb, who for some reason reminds me of Giorgio from Ancient Aliens. Anyway, he says that the prevailing theory is that humans were killed off due to escalators, which, believe it or not, I'm always afraid to get onto, since it always reminds me of that Final Destination 4 scene. Ugh. Anyway, he says that humans being sucked into the moving stairs and taken out by our own stupid dumb invention would have been quite the sight to see. However, our host lets us know that not everyone believes in humans, and it's here we meet the most important character of the series, Tiggy Skibbles, who is a skeptic. It's nice to know that in this weird world that skeptics still exist. Tiggy says humans aren't real and that we're just a ruse made up by the monolith to distract the population from the fact that someone is putting plants in their food.
Humans ain't real, brother. That's a ruse made up by the monolith to distract us from the fact that they are putting plants in our food.
Anyway, the host tells us that if you believe in humans or not, something did happen to Bobo that night, who we jump back to, and he tells us that he may have been wrong and it could have just been a tree he saw because it was dark and his eyes were closed. That ends the first episode, but what did we learn? Well, we learned that in this world, humans possibly don't exist, and instead these weird beings, which we later learn are called glurons, inhabit this world. Then we learned that there's something called the monolith, which was only mentioned once, but may be the thing that rules over these glurons. But let's continue.
On tonight's episode of
In the next episode of Unanswered Oddities, the topic is none other than religion, or as our host calls it,
Religion.
Our host tells us that religion were ancient systems of belief that supposedly held the keys to the afterlife and supposedly the promise of hot and horny 72-year-old virgin. Wait a minute, I think he has that little tidbit wrong. He tells the audience that every religion was guided by ancient texts which he believes were 100% completely made up.
That were part instruction manual, part history book, and 100% completely made up.
He then talks about how they don't follow any religion humans did and are instead guided by the voice of the monolith, though apparently some people have had some religious experiences. See, in the town of Ninis, a Gluron apparently believes he is the second coming of none other than the big J-man himself, Jesus Christ. I'm sorry, Hesus.
I'm Hesus. I'm back, hallelujah.
See, apparently Zerbal Washington believes he is Jesus, though if I'm being honest, he doesn't look anything like Jesus. But then again, who knows? I mean, have you seen biblical accurate angels? Be not afraid my fucking ass. Anyway, he tells us to let him into his heart, eat his body, but forgets where he has to take us.
All to the totally forgot where I'm supposed to take y'all.
Anyway, Professor Bort tells us that humans are rather gullible creatures, which, let's be honest, he's not wrong. But he says that apparently it doesn't matter because even if we follow different religions or follow the witchcraft of science, we apparently had it all wrong. Weird that he called science witchcraft, though. Lurby then tells us that while most religious texts were burned in 2293, the story of Jesus, as they know it, is that he died playing lacrosse, and then 3 days later he got an erection, which he tells us yet again would have been quite the sight. The host then tells us that some Glurons see similarities between religions of the past and the monolith of their time. Tibby then appears on screen and goes into his usual skeptic behavior.
Religion is a lie, brother. The monolith is a lie. None of this is real. You're not real. I'm not real. You mean to tell me we're all just meat ghouls riding a rock and ripping cigs? F*** that. Tiggy's calling bull.
However, religion is real for Zerbal, who believes he is still Jesus Christ, and tells us he has a message for us, but can't remember it, and there's a reason for this. See, the host tells us that Zerbal's doctor found something rather odd in Zerbal's brain, and you're not gonna fucking believe this. It's apparently a turtle lodged in his fucking skull. The doctor says that the case of brain turtle may be the reason he believes himself to be the big J-Dog himself. At the end of the episode, the host then tells us that even if religion isn't real, and if it is just a fantasy, you have to admit you could make a lot of money off of it. I mean, he's not wrong. Have you seen those fucking mega churches?
On tonight's episode of Unanswered.
Episode 3 is about outer space. Oh, I'm sorry, I mean, Uter Spachi.
Uter Spachi.
The host tells us that thanks to the monolith, they know that space isn't possible to go to or live in, but it makes them wonder if they are truly alone, which is a question I always have when I don't get a match on a dating app. Anyway, in the city of No, which is apparently 15 seconds outside of Deedle, someone claims to have been abducted by beings from
Uter Spachi.
Apparently, sweet old Geggy Burlode was taken by none other than space lizards. Quick, call Captain Kirk! Apparently, this space lizard took a piece of her skin and she cried, frightening one of the lizards, but because she's the sweetest old Gluron, she felt bad for the little guy and told him to take as much skin as he wanted, which is a haunting sentence. We then hear from Special Agent Guck Radell of the Monolithic Bureau of Insinuation, or MBI, who tells us that the current stance of the monolith is that space can neither be reached nor traveled, which is odd since you'd think these Glurons would be aliens, but it appears they originate from Earth. He also lets us know that if someone says that space can be traveled, they are subjugated to lifetime imprisonment or non-fatal stabbings by a jury of your peers, which I don't know how multiple stabbings could be non-fatal. Lurby then tells us that humans believe that
Uter Spachi
was banged into existence and tells us to imagine a hot celestial Casanova just creaming into empty space with its hot white cosmic energy. Okay, he didn't say that, but that's what I heard. The host tells us that the grand scale of
Uter Spachi
is hard to grasp for some.
Where the f*** am I?
We then hear that Geggy has been imprisoned by the MBI, where she sounds like she's being tortured.
They don't let us sleep, and they got us on these regularly scheduled electrocutions, but it's not so bad in here.
Agent Guck then tells us that he doesn't remember Greggy at all, even though he seemed to really enjoy her cookies.
I do not recall eating said cookies. I do not recall saying yummy after every bite.
The host then kind of goes off topic and he begs for his girlfriend, whose name is Ragnora, to take him back after making a mistake at a friend's birthday jam, and he swears he's changed.
On tonight's episode of Unanswered.
The next episode is about the good old US of A. Oh, my bad, it's no longer the United States of America, but it's the lost city of America.
The lost city of America.
That's right, in this topsy-turvy world, it seems that instead of the lost city of Atlantis, we're the lost city of America. The host tells us that this mythical land was a valiant protector of defenseless corporations. Oh, defenseless my ass. Anyway, the host also says that we were carrying home for over 350 million guns, which in my opinion is not enough guns. Apparently we also love things like baseball and apple pie and not having health insurance. Speaking of health insurance, nah, that's too easy. I'm not going to make that joke. Apparently, no one knows what happened to America, or if it's even real. But apparently, that hasn't stopped anyone from searching for the lost city. As apparently, in West Deedle, which if you didn't know was west of Deedle, one Gluron claims to have found America. You see, Reister Pruckett, a switchblade enthusiast and the Gluron with the most southern name I've ever seen, came out to practice his switchblading, and apparently found the American flag, which is close enough. Professor Bort appears yet again and tells us the apparent lore of America, and tells us that we Americans ate nothing but hot dogs and pharmaceuticals, and in order to make sure that Reister was telling the truth, they would test the soil, which Reister did by smoking the dirt. After he smoked the dirt, he woke up 37 hours later thinking he was a warrior and a princess, and says that he's 100% sure it's American soil, which, yeah, sounds about right. Lurby then tells us that while what happened to America is still an unsolved mystery, but the apparent story of how America came to be is as follows. We came to a land that was completely unoccupied and sought freedom from an empire that imposed taxes upon us, and so, in retaliation, we threw a giant tea party that killed 20,000 people, forcing the empire to flee and finally giving us freedom to build our city where, again, no one else lived. However, another Gluron says they know the truth of America, but has asked to remain anonymous out of fear. But come on, we all know who it is. This individual tells us that the one true monolith was forged in the Lost City, as he also tells us about a familiar small corporation making gumballs. But before we can get the full story, the TV distorts and we cut back to the host. However, this does tell us that there is a connection between Gumo Corp and the monolith. Perhaps Zorgop is the monolith. But the episode doesn't end there, as we get an update on the story, as it seems that none other than Tiggy has gone missing. Oh no, this seems like the work of a certain three-lettered agency.
On tonight's episode of Unanswered.
The next episode is about marriage, where the host tells us that marriage was an ancient trap that was used to imprison two people for a lifetime of not being able to pick what to watch. Apparently, the host tells us that most outcomes of marriage would end terribly, and tells us that we might think humans would try to avoid such a thing, but says that they continue to make such commitments, which begs the question of why anyone would get married. But it seems that in Deepton, the ancient practice of marriage has been resurrected, as a Gluron by the name of Yerk, who has killed before, is married. You see, Yerk apparently found his bride in the market, and I'll just let you see for yourself.
Anyway, I saw my beautiful bride across the market. She was one of a kind. Her gorgeous eyes, her flowing hair, that horn thingy that I like to suck on. I proposed to her that day.
Professor Bort then tells us that humans used marriage as a way to barter for land, power, but mostly donkeys. But as time passed, humans romanticized marriage to be between soulmates, and says that it is possible that Mr. and Mrs. Tweedlebug are soulmates. But thankfully he and I agree that it just seems like York is fucking a stuffed animal. Then Lurby tells us that the practice of marriage had a cult-like practice to it that went as such in his words. Apparently, people would gather to watch a couple walk down a grocery aisle, and a bear would follow them carrying their cuffs, apparently making sure that neither could escape, and that eventually the groom was instructed by a Prius to kick the bride. The host then tells us that most deem this practice as primitive and unnecessary, as none other than Tiggy agrees. We cut to Tiggy. However, there's something off about our dear Tiggy Skibbles, as it appears he has been replaced by a robot, and is clearly trying to act like nothing is different. Though, of course, there's plenty different.
Up, sibling. There is no greater bond than the one we share with the monolith. We could all certainly enjoy a cigarette with the all-truth. It's the cheese and such. I am Tiggy Skibbles. No need to question that.
The host asks us again why anyone would consider getting married in this day and age, where Yerk tells us it's because of love, and tells us that love is the most powerful magic. Aww. Then excuses himself to go fuck that stuffed unicorn, and the episode ends there.
All this and more can be found in the Cop Files.
With that, we take a break from Unanswered Oddities as we cut to a new show called The Cop Files, where in Crumpdale PD we follow Officer Prag Snarbo, who is searching for none other than our beloved Tiggy Skibbles. Officer Snarbo tells us that he doesn't watch Unanswered Oddities and is more of a bug fight guy, and was only given the case because it was low priority. He tells us that Tiggy didn't show up for work and was reported missing, but showed up a few days later, with many assuming he went on a bender. However, it seems another Glura noticed that it wasn't Tiggy, but a robot, which apparently fooled everyone on the set of Unanswered Oddities. Which I don't know how, because if one of my coworkers showed up looking like that, I'd be pretty sure that wasn't them. So after the report of the fake Tiggy, Officer Snarbo hits the streets and looks for Tiggy at his usual haunts, which consisted of the beer heap, the liquor dump, and Gugu's porn vat. But there's no Tiggy, and no robot either. Snarbo thought the case would go cold, but a 119 call comes in that reignites the case, as a caller says he just heard his neighbor possibly being murdered, and the person being murdered cried out, "Don't murder me, I'm Tiggy Skibbles." Officer Snarbo races to the scene and arrives at the location where he searches the house before finding none other than the fake Tiggy murdered, and the episode ends there.
All this and more can be found in the Cop Files.
On the next episode of the Cop Files, we're told that Crumdale PD is on high alert after finding the body of Robot Tiggy. Officer Snarbo is horrified by the fact that someone would have two couches in the same room facing each other, but after searching the rest of the house, the real Tiggy was nowhere to be found, but they did find something. They found a receipt which belongs to some convenience store called Moogle's, which told the cops that a bag of hair was bought from the store an hour before the robo-murder took place. They look at security footage of the store where they find one Gluron buying a bag of hair and bring him in for questioning, but this Gluron claims to not know Robot Tiggy.
What do you know about Tiggy Skibbles?
Never heard the name.
But then Officer Snarbo has a brilliant idea, as he plans to booze up the suspect to get an answer out of him, which I'm sure is 100% illegal, even in our world, so please, cops, if you're watching this, don't do that. At first, the suspect is hesitant, but after a few beers, he reveals that he was ordered to get rid of Robot Tiggy, then tie the real Tiggy at some secret location and leave him there. And while he doesn't know who ordered him to do it, they paid him quite a bit. Snarbo knows he'll get in trouble for what he did to get that information, but he's going to get Tiggy back anyway. And with that, the episode ends there.
All this and more can be found in the Cop Files.
On the third and final episode of the Cop Files, we're told that the MBI has taken a sudden interest in the Tiggy case. Snarbo is a bit upset that the MBI have taken over the case and says he wishes he could have solved the case, as he wanted to be called a hero for saving Tiggy and get a nice sash saying "neat job" or something like that, but says maybe that isn't for him, and he's not a detective. We then see the familiar face of Agent Guck Rodell, who tells us he praises Officer Snarbo for his efforts, but says that the MBI needs to step in at this point. Yeah, I think whenever a certain three-lettered agency says that they need to be involved in something, they're for sure trying to cover something up. Anyway, Agent Guck says that they might not find Tiggy and that this entire case might just disappear, and that they should not question these kinds of things, which again, is pretty suspicious. However, Snarbo reveals that the location where Tiggy is apparently being held is some old worship site run by the Church of Z, who apparently take worshipping the monolith to a whole totally different level. Snarbo says that he's no longer involved in the case anymore and goes out on patrol, but he's actually going to rescue Tiggy himself and arrives at the old site of the Church of Z. Strangely, the lights of the old place are still running as Snarbo searches for Tiggy, and after a bit of searching, he eventually does find Tiggy.
You in there? It's the police.
The police, but also please help me.
After rescuing Tiggy, Snarbo heads back inside to see if anyone else needs to be saved, but someone shoots our brave officer in the back, and unfortunately, Officer Snarbo dies at the scene. What a tragedy. But his death wasn't in vain, as Tiggy is in stable condition at the hospital and will seemingly be fine. However, he doesn't remember much of anything, which again is a bit suspicious in my end. The episode ends with a shot of Officer Prag Snarbo's grave with a sash on it and a word of text saying, "In loving memory of Detective Prag Snarbo," meaning that when he died, the station honored his wishes as he wanted to become a detective. So, at least we end on a happy ending a little bit. For now, that's where I'll end the video, but what have we learned? Well, there's definitely a clear connection between Gumo Corp, Unanswered Oddities, and the Cop Files, as it seems that they share the same world, with the Gumo Corp video taking years, perhaps even centuries before Unanswered Oddities, as it seems humans are extinct and Glurons now walk the earth. Or, hear me out on this theory, but Glurons are humans. I have no evidence for this, but I wouldn't put it past Neural Viz to reveal that Glurons are just humans transformed into these weird creatures, with some Glurons retaining some memories when they were humans. Though, going back now and rewatching some episodes, this theory is proven untrue, since in the religion episode it states that the year 2293 has passed, meaning that this does take place in the future. Anyways, it appears that the only one who knows the truth behind everything is Tiggy, who is going to reveal everything in episode 4 but was taken and replaced by Robo-Tiggy, either by the Church of Z or the MBI. My money's on both, but was rescued by Officer Snarbo. However, it seems parts of his memory were erased either by the MBI or the Church of Z, and Snarbo was for sure killed for rescuing Tiggy. I'm also sure that the Z in the Church of Z stands for Zorgop, but the question is if Zorgop is the monolith, as it seems like they might be two different entities, but I could be wrong. Anyway, there's certainly something going on in the background of this weird world, and I'll look into it more as it continues to be made, so if you want to get ahead of me in the timeline of the Unanswered Oddities world, go check out Neural Viz and watch their videos. For now, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in whatever video I make next, because let's be honest, it's a coin flip on what my next video is about.